sun is relatively motionless as we do. And that should be sufficient for an intro.
I'd like to make a couple questions back. It seems like a contradiction of terms, and maybe I misunderstood, but you said for every question we answer, there are two more questions.
That appear.
That appear.
Much like when we magnify to see something clearer, we now see additional things we didn't see before. And that's what the electron microscope or anything has done. The telescope shows us what we looked at, and then we see things we hadn't seen. So
then at the same time, we challenge and evaluate and come closer to the truth. Are we coming closer to the truth with more questions?
Only within that sphere of light, in which we have the infinite darkness, which is all questions we're not even aware of.
And one other, as a mathematician.
A mathematician?
Well, no, I better say that.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that one.
It's all right.
I was a math major.
That's all right.
You talked about how they're expanding pi out to many decimal places. Will they ever come to the end?
I don't believe so, but I'm not a mathematician. If you want to know, I use 3.1416 and never go any further, and it's sufficient for me. But if I were plotting the path of an orbiting device, say, 3 or 4 years out in space, I'd better have that carried out to many more decimal points.
And then there's several questions here, and I'm not, I'd like to let you have a little bit more time because there's several questions about the age of the Earth and versus young versus old. Can you give just you gave a couple things. Would you give a couple things more, or a couple things to tell you? I remember you said something about the sun is shrinking, the moon is receding. That's the two I wrote down. But give a couple reasons why you believe that the Earth is young, and then you give a couple reasons why you believe the Earth is old. And just, I mean.
Okay, meteors, the fact that we still have meteors in space, I should be on this mic here?
Sorry.
Okay. Yet comets or meteors only last 10 to 15,000 years before they're blown apart by the solar wind, yet we still have hundreds or possibly thousands of comets and meteors floating through space, indicating either they are constantly being formed someplace, or the universe is indeed less than 10 or 15,000 years old, because that's about all the longer they can last. The Earth is slowing down. The spin rate is slowing down. The erosion rate of the continents, at the current erosion rate, the continents would erode flat in 14 million years, which means they have eroded flat 5 times since the dinosaurs died out by evolutionary thinking, just at the current erosion rate. And I know the current theory is the mountain uplifting and seafloor spreading, and I'm familiar with all of that. But that's just an indication that that's a limiting factor. You want things from, is that like what you're looking for?
Good.
Okay.
That's fine.
Well, the age of the Earth in absolute time is based on various means of radiometric dating. Carbon-14 was mentioned earlier, which, like a thermometer for, say, oral thermometer, which covers a rather narrow range of temperature, carbon-14 was never used or intended by anyone to go back as far as my colleague indicated. It is purely like a limited thermometer. It's a recent one. Lead uranium and others, but all of these, indeed, I can show you books and books. You were kind, actually, to talk about the few mistakes that were made by geologists and other scientists. That's, I guess, one of the things you learn from being one, is how many other mistakes have been made. History of being wrong, including, I might add, the United States scientists were the ones who most steadfastly held against seafloor spreading and continental drift. Our geophysicists insisted it was not possible for that to happen. And kicking and screaming, our colleagues around the rest of the world worked it out. Finally, 2 Americans came up with a theory, but it was back to the drawing board, along with the engineer who said the bumblebee doesn't fly. The bee, independent of this, flies nicely. Some of the problems with the examples given about time, the universe is indeed winding down and spreading out, but to use as a mathematician, or we'll say erstwhile mathematician, you appreciate the difference between a linear and a geometric relationship. And that is one of the problems, that no one has decided which application would be more appropriate when we try and crank things back. We know they're going out, so should they come back at a linear rate, an accelerating rate? We don't have any criteria against which to judge this. The same problem with the Big Bang Theory. Things are going out, you know, as things spread out, that's in accord. However, the problem is we don't know, and this is beyond our scope. There are things within our scope, and fossils. Fossils are accidents. I lecture on that, and I'm not thrown out of the university, but fossils should not occur, simply because this system is beautifully designed to recycle all the components. We have hosts of organisms that cause decay and recycling within the system, and cycles of all the atoms and elements. And it is only the exceedingly stupid or those caught in accidents that get preserved as fossils. And that goes for the men who fell in crevasses and the mammoths. Unfortunately, then, our judgments are based on remnants of probably the ones that are being selected out rather than the average. And gaps in the rock record, to be sure, you're quite correct. Nowhere does that column exist, because we have, on one hand, erosion taking place above sea level and deposition taking place below sea level or water level. And it is only through a composite of here and here and here, and that is listed as a generalized composite. But the cumulative converging evidence in seafloor spreading, the process in which our continents are moving about.
Good, I was hoping you'd explain that.
This essentially pulls these things together in a way that almost makes me suspicious. And a lot of geologists are putting the brakes on lest everyone think that this is a unifying theory with no flaws. For such a theory certainly is not the handiwork of man.
And you mentioned, you brought up several questions on Big Bang. I think that was in the news here recently. I know I talked about it on the radio program, and the news article that I read stated how the universe could have come from particle the size of an atom.
And you could have won $1 million. That could is a critical operative word.
Both of you make a comment on the Big Bang Theory from your...
It's purely that. And it's based on this cranking back. If everything's going out, they say, aha, then we'll run it back and see when it all comes together. The question is how fast you run it back. And I agree with you. I don't think anybody has the foggiest idea of doing it. And they come back at different times. And they'll be arguing about that at professional meetings for some time. And we'll all go on with our lives completely indifferent to that, I might add.
Okay.
The evidence he's referring to about it spreading out, there are a number of astronomers and geologists that would disagree and say it is not spreading out. The evidence is based on the red shift. We do not know how far away the stars are. We can only measure up to maybe 100 light years, and we're using parallax trigonometry, so some people stretch it to 200. I think that's a little beyond credibility, but regardless, it's certainly not millions. We do not know how far away the stars are. They may very well be billions of light years away, and we do not know for sure that they are spreading. There are many astronomers, reputable astronomers, who will say that the red shift is due to other causes that has nothing to do with the Doppler effect of light of the receding universe. So I'm not saying they're not spreading, but I'm saying we don't know that they are. If